Both in today's first reading and in the gospel reading, we are reminded of this call to perfection. Actually, it's something that God requires of us more than just a call. It's a requirement to be holy, basically. And in today's second reading also, there's something related to this holiness of ours, this call to holiness. What does holiness consist of, right? So in today's second reading, St. Paul, he reiterates that we are God's temple. And he says that if anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. So in other words, we need to respect other human beings. But you see, the reality is that we ourselves can destroy this temple of God that we are when we commit sin. If we commit a mortal sin, we lose the presence of God within us. So when we are baptized, God dwells within us. We are united to God. But if we commit a mortal sin, we lose that presence of God. And so we would need to go to confession to receive it back. So it's very important that we try to root sin out of our lives, not just mortal sin, but all sin. So this call to perfection, this call to holiness entails a turning away from sin, something that we are all called to. And in addition to turning away from sin or not committing sin, it's also important that we have self-mastery, self-control. In other words, in order to be holy, in order to be perfect, it's not enough for us simply to avoid committing sin. We also need to have the ability to do the right things at the right time and in the right way. And usually when we are given over to sin, we lack self-control. In other words, our passions, our sinful inclinations, they kind of determine the choices that we make. Many people are addicted to certain sins, and some people, they struggle with habitual sin. And it's important that they maintain that struggle. And if they're genuinely striving to overcome their sinful inclinations, God will give them the grace that they need. But often what happens is, people, they're addicted to a particular sin and they just say, oh, well, I can't really overcome this. And they still go to confession occasionally, but they're not really wholeheartedly committed to overcoming their sin. And that's very unfortunate. So we need to persevere in overcoming sin. We need to avail ourselves of the sacrament of confession. We need to pray regularly. We need to nourish ourselves on our Lord's true presence in the Eucharist. All these things will help us to overcome our sinfulness and to enable us to have greater self-control. Now, in today's first reading from the book of Leviticus, notice how it mentions, you shall reprove your neighbor or you will incur guilt yourself. You shall reprove your neighbor or you will incur guilt yourself. In other words, as Catholics, we are called to speak out against injustice in society. And if we don't, we're partially responsible for allowing these evils to propagate in society. So we need to be concerned about many social issues. We need to speak out. We need to speak out against, all the stuff that they're teaching or indoctrinating our children with, even in the Catholic school system. And we all need to be united in speaking out. If we are united, people will take heed. But if it's just a few people, then they're not going to listen to us. And in fact, they're going to persecute us. We have even one of our own parishioners, Mike Del Grande, and, he's being attacked. So he's having to go to lawyers to defend himself because he's opposed to all the garbage that they're trying to indoctrinate our children with, all this LGBT, transgenderism stuff. We need to speak out. But I especially wanted to focus on this reproving your neighbor. It's one of the spiritual works of mercy to admonish the sinner. But I wanted to relate it to the family, since it's Family Day tomorrow, so this weekend anyways. And, parents need to reprove their children. They need to correct. They need to admonish their children. They need to discipline their children. Sometimes they need to punish their children. And this is very, very important. Often children, they resent parents that are very strict. But sometimes once those children grow up, they're very grateful that their parents were strict with them. They realize how beneficial it was for them. Years ago, I read a book. It was called Why Good Parents Have Bad Kids. And one of the things that really stuck with me from that book is it emphasized that parents need to be consistent. In other words, if a parent says no, they must persevere. They need to be consistent in saying no. Because what often happens is children are very clever and they know how to manipulate their parents. Take, for example, a parent is shopping at Walmart with their young child and the child wants a toy or something and mommy says no. And so the child starts throwing a temper tantrum, embarrassing mommy in public. And so mommy says, oh, okay, just be quiet. I'll buy it for you. But this is very bad. What is the parent teaching the child? The parent is teaching the child, no doesn't mean no. You don't need to respect your parents. You don't need to respect adults. You don't need to respect the police or the laws in society. You can get whatever you want, provided you push the person's right buttons. So they're spoiling their children. They're not teaching them discipline. They're not reproving their children. And such children often grow up to be very, very selfish and self-centered, and they don't have healthy relationships because they don't know how to practice self-control. They are not able to manifest love. They tend to manipulate people. They tend to use people. This is very, very unfortunate. And it's happening so often. And, a lot of children grow up in this way. And the reality is not just for children, but even for us. We need to be able to control our desires, because if we're not, we're just going to give in to whatever impulse we feel. And that's not good. And sometimes these children, when they don't get what they want, they just mope, right? They make the parents feel miserable until the parent says, oh, okay, I'll let you do whatever, right? They use different tactics. They know how to manipulate parents. So in other words, the real boss in the family is the child and not the parent. This is not good. So parents need to reprove not just their neighbor, but their children. Otherwise, they will incur guilt themselves. In other words, they're responsible for how their children will live. I'm sure parents want their children to be happy as they grow up and to be able to make it to heaven. In order to do that, we need self-control. So in order to be holy, in order to be perfect, yes, we need to avoid sin. We need to root sin out of our lives. Yes, we need to have self-control. But even that is not enough. What we really need is love. And this is what our Lord is emphasizing in today's gospel reading. He's telling us we need to love everyone. We need to love our neighbor as ourselves. We need to love even our enemies. Now notice how he says, do not resist an evildoer, and he gives a number of examples: turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, so on and so on. Is he saying that we should just allow people to abuse us and take advantage of us and walk all over us? No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that there are many occasions when people offend us or take advantage of us that's okay. We can just turn the other cheek. We can just go the extra mile. In other words, we don't need to be so upset about it. But he's not saying that we should just allow any and all abuse. In other words, he's telling us, speak out against injustice in society. Reprove your neighbor. If there is injustice happening to you, speak out. Do something about it. So he's telling us to do these things. But there's so many things that we could just easily forgive and forget. But people, they just get angry. They hold on to a grudge and they hate they're not willing to forgive. And that's not right. So love is very, very important in the spiritual life. Loving God first and foremost. Secondly, loving our neighbor as ourselves, which means being merciful, being kind, being generous, being there for others. In other words, not just focusing our lives on ourselves and how can I gratify my own desires. No, instead of focusing on how can I make others happy? How can I be at the service of others? This is what we're called to do. And it's in doing this that we ourselves become fulfilled, we become happy, and we have better relationships. I've often referred to couples who are madly in love, and this is what God wants for us. He wants us to be madly in love with Him. And when couples are madly in love, it makes it easy for them to avoid sin. It makes it easier for them to have greater self-control, greater self-mastery. Another, when a person is enthralled with their beloved, they're going to be less likely to be looking at someone else or to be tempted by someone else because they feel committed to their beloved. And they're going to manifest the best side of themselves. They're going to be punctual. They're going to be, doing all the right things, saying all the right things. They're on their best behavior. So love is like a key ingredient to holiness. You know, it's interesting how often these couples, when they're courting, they're madly in love, then they get married, and sometime after they're married, you know, they start taking each other for granted, and these warm and fuzzy feelings of love, they dissipate. And so they're no longer on their best behavior. In other words, you start to see the person as they really are. And it's then that sometimes couples realize, oh my gosh, maybe I married the wrong person. But anyways, when they realize there's these issues, those issues need to be addressed. And people within marriage, they need to overcome their sinful, selfish inclinations so that they can make their love work, that they can make their relationship work. If they're not making the effort to do that, they're going to make their spouse miserable for the rest of their lives, or they're going to end up divorced. So yes, love is very important, but love is something that we constantly need to work at. And especially when it comes to love of God. We need to work at a loving relationship with God. How do we do this? Well, meditating on the life of Christ, reading the scriptures, especially the New Testament, spending time in prayer, nourishing ourselves by means of the sacraments, knowing our faith and living our faith to the best of our abilities. So you see, when we think of this call to perfection, this call to holiness, you know, it doesn't appeal to many people because, oh, it seems so difficult. It seems so difficult for me to overcome all my sinful inclinations. It seems so difficult for me to be so self-controlled and diligent in doing all the things that I need to do. But you see, this call to holiness is really a call to love. So in other words, God is calling you to fall in love. And falling in love is a beautiful thing. You know, when we think of priests or those who enter the religious life, why do they do that? You know, why do they forsake all the goods of this world, having their own family, you know, falling in love, all these things? It's not because they don't appreciate those things. They do. They recognize the value. But they also recognize that being in love with God, having a greater, closer relationship with God is far more rewarding than anything else. And this falling in love with God is something that we are all called to. Everyone. Whether you're married or single or religious, it doesn't matter. Everyone is called to do this. And this is what true holiness consists of. If we truly love God and truly love our neighbor, yes, we will avoid sin. We will be more diligent. We will do the right things. We will have greater self-control. You know, if I were to ask you, let's say as a homework assignment, you know, to make a list of all the people that you really love in your life, you know, in order of preference. You know, let's say maybe just list 10 people. Some people may not be able to list 10, but just list the people that you love in order of your preference. And also to make another list of all the people that you hate or despise or really dislike in order of preference, the one that you hate the most at the top and going down the scale. You know, most people would be able to do that. But you see, the reality is that for us, who are called to be followers of Christ, who are disciples of Christ, there should be no one on that list of people that we hate. No one. In other words, Christ is telling us to love everyone, even those who persecute us, even those who harm us, to love your enemies and to pray for them, to wish them well. This is what we are called to do. And I'm sure most of us probably fall short. So it's something we need to work at. And yes, we need God to help us. And the more that we love God, the more that we are in a loving relationship with God, the more we will receive of his blessings and graces, which will enable us to be the way he calls us to be. And, you know, God also gives us the example of the saints. They're an inspiration to us, an example, an inspiration, but they're also great intercessors for us. You know, think, for example, here in North America, the secondary patrons of Canada are the North American martyrs, the Jesuit martyrs. There's 8 of them. And one of those individuals is Saint John de Brebeuf. And he was a great spiritual man. And the Indians, the North American Indians, they knew he was a great spiritual man. So when they captured him, they wanted to make an example of him. They were going to kill him, but they wanted to do a long, drawn-out, slow torture just to give an example to all the other Christians. The message was, if you become a Christian, this is what's going to happen to you. And, I encourage you to look up exactly what they did to him. So various people who were present, Christians, were later escaped, and they related what happened to him. But, just to mention a couple of things, one of the things they did is they scalped him while he was still alive, and they boiled water and poured it over his scalped head 3 times in mockery of baptism. And during his whole torture, he kept looking at the Indians with great love, and he kept preaching to them, trying to convert them. They eventually got fed up with his preaching, so they cut off his lips and stuffed his mouth so he wouldn't be able to speak, but he continued to look with love upon them. So this is just an example of heroic love in the face of torture, in the face of pain and suffering and your imminent death. Loving those who are persecuting you and causing you all this pain and suffering, who are going to take away your life. And of course, a very good example for all of us is also the Holy Family, the family of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. And they are the ideal model for all families. The church says that the family is the domestic church. It's in the family that children first learn the faith, from their parents, from the example of their parents, from the efforts of their parents to practice the faith. And good families produce good citizens. So families are the cells of society. So it's important that we have good families. It's important that we look to the Holy Family to inspire all of us. So I invite you at this time to join in consecrating yourselves and your families to the Holy Family. Where's our technician? He's late again. Okay, some of you have...